So I'm Karen Erickson with the Alpha-1 Foundation, and we'll kind of introduce ourselves as we go along. Tracy and I just had a quick conversation. We're going to get through a couple slides. Alpha-1 Foundation, we'll give some anecdotal stuff having to do with this, and we'll hit a model with Tracy. Let's keep it a little casual. If you have something that's burning and you raise your hands, we'll manage the questions that way. And if it gets too cumbersome, then we'll go right back to asking questions at the end. Fair enough? All right. And of course, it's being live streamed, so either wait for a mic or I'll repeat your questions, so it'll seem a little bit cumbersome. And Tracy will do the same. So we'll, again, kind of manage the time. Like I said, the Alpha-1 Foundation will go through some of the anecdotal stuff. We've been around for a while and have, just reached kind of the translational side where we're going into, we have a VC organization now, and then Tracy has a wonderful model for really how do you set your research objectives on up to defining what impact in the community is and what that success looks like, all things that you need to do. So let's jump in and really realize that as a patient advocacy group, we have, I would say, the critical role in driving clinical research and ultimately getting to the success. And success needs to be defined, of course, in your own organizations. With the Alpha-1 Foundation, we'll get into our missions. It's a little bit different, I think, than at the stage where we're at right now with LGS. But the mission, the scientific agenda, is largely defined by the patient advocacy group. And you've got to bring the community in, your scientists, your investors, your investigators, your clinicians, everything. And it's really important when you assemble these guys, before you do so, to really know your target. We are uniquely positioned to define meaningful endpoints. We know the patient preferences. Not only do we know the patient preferences, but we know exactly what a patient is willing to do and what they're not willing to do, and the considerations that they make when they're going to sign up for clinical trials or where they're going to participate in your mission. That's pretty powerful. So if you're not making a point that you come to the table with value, change your mindset and know that you do. Set up the infrastructure that you need, the committees, put the patients on them, whether it's grants, advisory, medical and scientific, community engagement. Again, patient preferences lend to meaningful endpoints and make you quite attractive to the investigators out there. We're going to talk with your model about the strategic objectives, what the milestones are, what the measurements are. We'll give you, again, some examples in Alpha-1. And certainly, we've all are up against the challenges of the funding structure. We thought it was really important to start with the missions of our two organizations and the research agenda. So on the Alpha-1 side, and I'll let you talk to yours, on the Alpha-1 side, we want to find a cure for Alpha-1, and we want to improve the quality of life of those affected by Alpha-1, and that is caregivers, clinicians, investigators, patients alike, worldwide. And so our research agenda, again, that comes with patients, medical and scientific advisory committee, LC, ethical, legal, social issue, working groups, et cetera, all with patients on it. Our agenda follows that, right? Basic research, identifying targets for new therapies, clinical research, looking at epidemiology and natural history of Alpha-1, evaluating novel therapeutic approaches, again, the LC issues associated with rare disease clinical trial design and therapeutic development, and then developing and renewing the Alpha-1 research kind of workforce, right? Young investigators, making sure that there's a mentorship, making sure that when you look for grants or when you measure your success at the Alpha-1 Foundation, we look at that, not only the expertise that we have in our KOLs, but where's the next generation? Tracy, you want to handle?
Sure, Great, so I'm Tracy Dixon-Salazar with the LGS Foundation, and we have a really unusual foundation in that LGS, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, is a group of symptoms. So you have multiple seizure types, you have intellectual disability, you have onset of your seizures before the age of 5 years old, and you have a very specific EEG pattern, slow spike and wave on the EEG. So there's about 200 or more causes of LGS, including about 100 genes. We know families who have Down syndrome that have developed LGS secondary to their trisomy. We've got Phelan-McDermott syndrome, tuberous sclerosis, hypothalamic hamartoma, birth injury. I mean, so we're dealing with not a single gene disorder, but it can also be caused by acquired causes. But it doesn't really seem to matter what the cause is in LGS. Once you develop this slow spike and wave on EEG, you can't learn anymore. You're going to keep having seizures, and your life is going to be shortened. And these kids are having seizures every day, hundreds of them. So it's quite impactful. So we sort of span and just wrap our arms around anybody in the space. And from a support and empowerment standpoint, we support and empower families who have LGS right now and the day-to-day issues that they're dealing with their kids. But when we talk about research, we really think that we need to intervene early. So if there's a gene, SCN2A or SCN8A, that is the cause of the initial seizures, which then become out of control and hijack brain development to get to LGS, we need to target that before you have this lifelong disability and this child. So I have a 25-year-old daughter with LGS, and I think almost all of our families would say, get in there early and stop this, this runaway train before it's too late. And so we really focus on our research side and on our medical education on identifying those at risk of developing LGS, those who have what we call pre-LGS, where they look like they're going to evolve into this abnormal brain pattern. And then and we really try to focus on building research in areas where nobody is looking at it. What are the biomarkers of the transition from uncontrolled seizures to this EEG pattern that we see. So we have a very, very different mission, and it sort of spans, like I said, about 100 different genes. So we love it when a new gene group pops up, and we're like, oh, good, you guys cured that one. We're going to go do the other 99 genes that we have to deal with and try to get a foundation started for those. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so we're completely different there. Alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency is one gene. Although there's over 400 allelic kind of mutations, there's a couple that really make up the core of the symptomatic population that we see, and certainly the ones we want to diagnose. So we're different in our missions there, but I think the strategy that we get to, working towards our impact models and what our success looks like are similar. And real quickly, because we'll discuss some targets in our next slides for alpha-1. Alpha-1, again, single gene, causes a protein that's made in the liver to be made in a fashion that affects its folding, gums up in the liver, causing cirrhosis. Because it can't get out of the liver in a functional protein, or it gets destroyed, you have a deficiency in the bloodstream and can't protect your lungs in a natural checks and balances between your immune system. So lung and liver disease, multi-organ on alpha-1. I think you're up.
Am I up?
I think so.
All right, let's see if I can work this. Okay, so I also am a scientist by training, so my science is going to show a little bit here. I have a PhD in neuroscience, so please forgive me if this is not good. You can put it in the after evals. But when we came to this space in LGS, we were trying to figure out what type of research we wanted. We really needed all of them. The goal is forward and reverse translational research. So you start here with clinical research in patients where you actually define the disease and you understand it, you understand how it evolves over time, when it's treated, when it's not treated, and then you go to the lab. I spent 15 years in the scientific research lab. You'd be amazed at the amount of research that is done that has absolutely nothing to do with the disease that they say they're studying. They're just evolving and pushing research forward. That's interesting, and they're not wrong. It's not bad. It's just not the type of research we want to fund. We want to fund the research that's going to get to patients one day and be really meaningful, and we want it to be based on something you see in patients. So we actually have 6 drugs that are approved for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome for LGS, but there are no animal models of LGS. So I'm happy to talk to you guys about that after the fact. And by and large, what we see is that greater than 90% of our patients are still having seizures every day. They're on 7 to 10 medications. They're severely intellectually disabled, have severe physical disabilities. So these drugs, while they do help us, some patients, and they can be incredibly meaningful, we have a long way to go. So you really want to define what's going on in your patient population and then translate that to the basic side, which is animal models, iPSC stem cells, fish, fly, whatever your model might be, and try to understand the biology of the things that you can't do in human patients, understand what the drug target is. And for those of you that have a gene, I'm so jealous. you know where to look, right? And then you want to take it back. There's a lot of scientists that will work on a gene forever, 20 years. And again, that's not wrong. It's important. We need that. But at some point, you will have enough information to move it back to patients. And so we really want to push that kind of agenda at our foundation of forward and reverse translational research. And I just want to show you our model. When I originally came into this space, people would say, well, our goal is, okay, well, which goal at which level? So you have scientists, the most important thing in my life when I was a scientist were grants and papers. As a mother of a kid with LGS, I don't really care about grants and papers, and I understand how it advances the field because I'm a scientist and why it's important. But if somebody comes and said, they got a Nature paper on this grant that we got, as a mother, I'm like, yeah, so? My child just is in the emergency room right now having uncontrolled, unstoppable seizures. So where are you defining it? And so that's why I brought in the framework a little bit here. And there's a lot for each of these terms, goals, objectives, activities, which are also your inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. You can delve into them. You can actually define these. And we did this at the foundation. So I'm going to go through this really quickly and just give you sort of a nuts and bolts overview of one model to define these things. So these are defined here, and you guys can all have these slides, but they're also defined here on the page. So I always start with impacts. What do you want to do in your community? What are your patients telling you? And please survey your patients and ask them. Don't just assume that your experience is the same. Really understand. It's like, if you could have a medicine that's going to fix something tomorrow, what would you want fixed? And you'll be surprised at the commonality and then some of the difference. But we always start. And so for us, we want to make meaningful changes that impact our patients' care and their quality of life in our research plan. So some of the things that we've looked at is, we want to prevent the onset, development, and progression of the disease. And these are all things you want to do too, right? So it's not, even though our diseases are so different, we want to decrease the death rate. It's a huge death rate in our patient population. We want to know the risk for death. So if you are at risk, you can do everything you wanted. We want to stop the symptoms. So seizures are a symptom in LGS, and we definitely want to stop those. We want to cure, we want to intervene early if we can, but there's nothing wrong with getting at the symptoms and stopping those. With as few meds as possible and few side effects. We want to be able to predict the onset of LGS and allow for intervention. And then, of course, we want to do education, support, and help. And you might think, education, support, and help aren't research. Well, actually, they should be based on the research that is out there. So when you go to educate, you're speaking the same language that doctors and scientists speak, and you're trying to get the families to understand that language. And then you're also doing the same thing when you go talk to the doctors and try to get them to speak the family language. So these are the impacts that we want. So how are we going to go about doing it? For us, our goals that, as a foundation, we want to fund patient-centered, meaningful research. We want to partner wherever we can because we're tiny. We are a tiny foundation of 3 staff people and a budget of not much, a few $100,000. We want to partner anytime we can, and we want to be driving the research agenda. If we run into something that isn't going to get to patients ever, isn't going to be meaningful, or doesn't really seem to be relevant to our patient group, it's not that we don't value that. It's just that that's not what we're going to spend our limited dollars that we're raising, selling brownies and bracelets on. So then we come to the objectives. So what are our specific objectives that we want to look at? For us, it's better phenotype and genotype data, so good genetic information, good clinical picture of what each of the genes look like, helping gene-specific groups get started if they break off from us. Better epidemiology and numbers, better treatments, better quality of life. And then for us, it's understanding the causes of LGS. We've been around about 10 years. We are tiny. We've mostly focused on support, but I'm happy to say that we think we know the cause of LGS in about 90% of cases, and it's because of the genomics and imaging revolutions that have happened. So, and we're going to take credit for all of it. all of it, because we funded one $50,000 grant, 5 years ago. We take credit for what they do forever after that. So this is where your grants program. These are your inputs or your activities, and it doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them programs or goals or whatever. But you have your research grant programs, and then you'll have the programs that you create to drive research, like your registry or your biorepository or your natural history database. And then you want to increase the partnerships. So you want to find the people that are already doing these things and that are best at it, and co-opt them to be a part of your team and a part of your advisories and things like that. I want to go back just for a second to the objectives. These are based off of what you would get out of a natural history study, these types of things. And this is how you know you're doing progress later on. You can measure them. So if you know the death rate in your disease, like they did with cancer, and then you measure it 10 years later, and it's gone down, then you as a foundation should take credit for the rest of your existence, right? Because that's how we know we're getting better. Is the prevalence better? Are the treatments better? Are the patients reporting better quality of life? Did the death rate go down? Not so many papers and so many drugs to market. It's really about impact. So these are your inputs, and you can have any number of them here. And then the outputs, these are really important to measure because they know you're making a difference and you're moving things forward. But these are things like publications from your scientists, from the grants, quality, quantity, whether or not they got out and were read, the number of projects that you create or that you fund, and again, the quality and the quantity. Your return on investment. If you fund a young investigator and they go on to get a huge NIH or DoD grant, that is a huge return on investment. You can invest a small $25,000 sum, and that can turn into a $5 million 5-year NIH grant very easily. Resource creation, there's a lot of things that happen in science where there's not open access to the animal models or to the antibodies or to the tissue. And so creating repositories and things, you can say, we've created 3 new repositories or 3 new resources for scientists or for doctors or for patients, and that's advanced the field. And then, of course, your number of partnerships. So each of these things are all things that you can measure, and they're important. Patients don't really, do high flips over these things because they're living in the trenches with the disease, but these tell you that the field is moving forward. And then you come to the outcomes. This is right before you know that there's going to be a meaningful change in patient impact. And these are things like a change in knowledge, a breakthrough, right? Or a change in clinical practice, or maybe a guideline that comes out, change in policy, a change in attitude. I mean, one of the biggest things that I saw in the epilepsy community is that 20 years ago, they used to say 2 things. Thankfully, we don't need to know what causes epilepsy to treat it. And the other one was you can't die from seizures. And both of those things have completely shifted in the epilepsy space. We talk about death from seizures all the time. The death rate is actually quite high. My daughter has a 26 times greater risk of dying before she's 30 than anybody, than a regular person who has seizures. So these types of change in dogma, they're a big deal. And then changes in behavior, the changes in the environment. If you fund, we funded 8 young investigators over the last 5 years, and they've all gone on to do LGS research. That's a change in the climate, the environment. And so if you can define these things for yourself, what's important to you, what are the metrics that let you know things are moving forward, it can really make a difference. And then you come back to the impacts. And a lot of this is not, it's still science. You ask your patients, how are you doing? Is the diagnostic journey, is it still 3 years, before you get a diagnosis? Are you getting genetic testing faster? Are the side effects better for the diseases? Are you going on? My daughter tried and failed 26 different therapies until we found something that helped her. And by helped her, I mean she has 2 to 4 seizures a week now. So that's how low the bar is in LGS. But and so you go back to your patients and you ask them the same questions you asked them when you were designing your pipeline for research. And so again, I went over this really fast. I'm happy to talk about these things, and you guys can have the bit. As you're setting this up, it's always nice to take a step back because all of us are going to get inundated with, okay, well, you should do this. This is a great opportunity. You want to be flexible for amazing opportunities, but you also want to know where you're going. And for me, it's someone will call me up and say, hey, can you write an article about, scientific advancement in this parent journal? And actually, it's a really important thing, and I should do that. But is it going to take me away from these goals I've set? And that's why I like these goals and setting it up in a way where I know where I'm going. So when I get overwhelmed with my to-do list, I go, what's important again? No, I can't write that article right now, but ask me in 6 months. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to you now, but hopefully that was a nuts and bolts helpful. And then Karen here, who has so much further along than we are, my money's on you to cure Alpha-1, and then come on over to LGS and help us out, is going to talk to you about what it looks like when things really get going.
That's very nice. And let me be real clear. I am not, while I have some history in biotech, I am not a neuroscientist. I happen to be a patient with Alpha-1. More importantly, a lot of my friends have Alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, and that drives me. But there's an urgency that I see. I'm a transplant patient. When I look for, if we go back to Rachel, I hope we cure this. I'm proud of my community, but I'm fearful that we're going to lose more patients. And shoot, I want to witness this, right? So when we talk about beginning with the end in mind, which you just did so eloquently, don't veer from that path. Be willing to reevaluate that as technology and your community grows, but begin with the end in mind and don't steer from that, because we will all be overwhelmed. So anyway, I come from a little bit different perspective, and I am completely I am here representing the Alpha-1 Foundation, but I am backed by our scientific officer, our committee, our medical director, all of that. And the Alpha-1 Foundation, we've been around a couple decades. We have a little bit different operating budget, right around $10 million per year. And like I said, we've started a VC group. So I think that our commonalities are glaring, and our differences are a great place for lessons. So let me talk about some of the things that we're doing at the Alpha-1 Foundation generally as it comes to tips and tools, and full disclosure about some of the spaces where we're turning on a dime and reevaluating what we need to do to be successful and reach that mission. So she's already said it. Position your organization, whether you have 1 people and $1 or 50 people and $10 million, you need to be the go-to. The Alpha-1 Foundation is the major sponsor of all Alpha-1 research going on. It's a great place to be in, but it's a stressful place to be in. When I talk about urgency, which I did, we were founded by 3 patients. Susan Sandy Lindsay, and a gentleman named John Walsh. Does anyone know John? Right. The most incredible man. And he was in the NIH trials when they were discovering augmentation therapy, our enzyme replacement. And he said, NIH actually came to us and said, okay, this longitudinal trial is over. If you want to continue research in Alpha-1, you're going to have to do it from a patient perspective, start your own organization, learn the ropes, earn the money to do it. And John, like he did so many times, just a bull in China shop, we're getting this done. And it took him about 5 seconds to say, hang on a minute. Although it's urgent, and although we want to cure this, and we want to find our patients, and we want them a good quality of life, it behooves us to back up a little bit, get the information, both from patients, from scientists, from clinicians, and say, what is the best path forward? What is the end that we need to get to, and how do we start? So part of that was building out the infrastructure. So before we invited investigators in and opened up grants, we put in the registry. We started garnering data. We started the DNA and tissue bank. We started an Alpha-1 research registry lab, or research lab at University of Florida. We built an AAV lab at University of Florida. And all of these things were staffed by scientists that we stole from NIH. So never underestimate the power of the personal relationships that you have, right? Our patients were in clinical trials. These clinicians fell in love with them, and we've drug them with us, and they've been with us for 20 years. That's the power that you have. Your stories absolutely dictate research. Do we have any questions? Okay, cool. Who has a problem with funding, right? Not a problem at all. Like I said, we have an incredible budget. As a matter of fact, the Alpha One Foundation has invested over $70 million in research and supporting programs at 122 institutions across the world. But what we did when we started the Alpha One Foundation was say, okay, where can we create a recurring source of revenue? So at the same time we started the Alpha One Foundation, we started AlphaNet. It's patients serving patients. We found a gap in our service model. We became the doers of that. So not only did we take that opportunity to create a recurring source of revenue, but we employed patients who were otherwise on disability, gave them insurance, and made them the liaisons in that process. Right? And so they now go through and they look at asymptomatic individuals, they look at individuals that are on our therapies, which are only augmentation, enzyme replacement, and I'm not minimizing it, we're super happy for it. And they have a cohort of patients that they follow. And by doing that, this not-for-profit partner has been able to invest over $50 million back into the Alpha One Foundation. So if anyone's looking at you, step in. Say, get some clinical trial expertise in you. Get certified. Be an adverse event line. Find some way to be part of the process to continue throwing money back in. Fair enough? We all can do something. Look at matching grants. Who's doing like work? We are very fortunate that we've had scientists that have been funded for 2 decades with NIH, right? Who's playing in the space and make sure that you're there. The collaborative research, we just mentioned some matching grants. We work with ALA, American Association of Liver Disease, ATS, NIH. If you have shared goals and you have your audience that you can discuss, and there's potentially another audience, I mean, we're the leading genetic cause of COPD. That opens up a lot. NIH came up with a strategic vision a couple years ago. Do rare diseases inform common chronic? And so we partnered with CF, right? Work yourself into someone else's mission if you could move yours forward. Don't always have to spend your own money. You'll see what we're doing with NIH. We have program grants out there. The infrastructure, we have a biomaterials exchange. We've built this group of clinicians and investigators, and while we have a couple animal models and we have some great assays and we're able to move stuff forward, they have a lot of stuff too. So we put them in touch, matchmaking. You need cells, you need lung tissue, you need liver tissue, you need this. Great, here's working on this. You guys can chat with each other and figure out how you're gonna transfer that stuff. So not only do we make sure that all of our investigators that develop anything have to share it broadly, we also ask them to do the same thing. And then venture philanthropy, which is where we're at with the Alpha One project. And I'm sorry, we set up over 80 clinical resource centers with practicing clinicians in Alpha One. So lots of movement there. The AlphaNet model is what I just described, right? So you have patients serving patients. It's a contract research organization. Who here makes their own flights arrangements, right? We're all doing that. Can you do it for a clinical trial and bring in some extra recurring source of money? Absolutely, folks. These are skills that you have. Find out what it is. The AlphaNet model really drives compliance. We use a weekly IV to augment our protein. Not fun, but our patients won't miss it for the world. We collect patient outcomes. There's 40 publications that have come out of a patient-driven organization. That's a lot of reported outcomes on these monthly calls that take place. We're running surveys, we're running studies through it. And in the last 2 decades of this organization, for lung patients who are followed by, again, a patient in AlphaNet and use augmentation therapy, we've been able to increase life expectancy by 30 years. If you have alpha-1 lung disease, you are followed by AlphaNet, and you are on augmentation therapy, you actually have 1 longer year of life than the average person. What? That's pretty incredible. And that's by patients driving that. And again, thank you to AlphaNet for the over $50 million that have gone into Alpha-1 research. Grants versus contracts. That was part of the title. Who knows the difference? Right? Contract is legally binding. they can have a lot of the same, the similar things, but it's tied to, a contract is tied to incremental payments upon milestones that are legally binding. Still at Alpha One Foundation, they're peer reviewed. We use an NIH style of grant review. Make sure that when you're defining success, you know how you're gonna get there. What does a good grant look like? What does the patient say? Who's on a grant advisory committee? Who looks at these? Because if it's one dude, probably not enough. Everything you need, or everything you do needs to have a bunch of different perspectives. Grants, of course, it's a little bit more flexible. You allow the principal investigator, it's investigator driven. There's terms and conditions in place, sure, but it's not necessarily legally binding, although you can have money or disbursements of the grants tied to different milestones. Again, it's peer reviewed at Alpha One, and it's largely awarded for initiated research projects. Make sure that you feel comfortable, though. If you know your organization needs to go in a particular direction, put out a request for applications on that exact direction. So don't be afraid to really define. Move forward. So how's success measured here? Again, contracts really is legally binding. Grants a little less rigid, but you have to complete the basic or clinical research that you're doing. We look at publications, we look at abstracts, we look at follow-on funding, we look at what the investigator does, whether they go into academia, whether they get funded by NIH, where can we partner with them further. Data sharing, there's no and, if, or buts about it at the Alpha One Foundation. People are hungry for money. If you give it to them, set your terms. If sharing data and sharing tools that are developed through your money is what you want, make that known. We just had an investigators meeting with 600 people in the room where the investigators stood up and talked about where they were in their research progress. Right? That's important to us. And again, continued career in space. So there's a couple different types of opportunities. There's the in-cycle research grants. There's out-of-cycle research grants. Again, there's types of grant opportunities here. Remember that you can do these scheduled. We use a platform for it. Out-of-cycle grants, when there's a great idea that comes to you, make sure you have an allowance for this. I have just mentioned requests for applications. Make sure you know what you need and you ask for it. The investigators that come to you, both in-cycle and out-of-cycle, I mean, they're incredible science. But if you're streamlining money, you want to go in a particular direction, or you change your strategy to where you want to get to and how you want to get there, let that be known. Drive your own success. We have a portfolio that's fairly robust. We have our program grants and running kind of all the infrastructure, basic research, pilot feasibility, looking at postdocs, bridge grants, liver initiative. We have ethical, legal, social issue workshops. So we look at everything we think comprehensively will lend us not only to the basic research that allows us to do translational research, but all the ethical components, the engagement components, and the support components that come in with the infrastructure that we have back there. Like I said, know where you're going, but be humble enough to say, gosh, we need to reevaluate this. We need to switch direction. We need to tweak it a little bit. Make sure that's known, but stay true to where you say you're going to go to. You can move the mission and really stay attractive to the investigators and donors with a robust and transparent process that you have. And again, influence where your science goes if it's time if it's time to do that. The Alpha One Foundation, we've been around for 20 years. We've invested a lot of money in research. You'll see some things that we're working on. We need new endpoints. In the respiratory space, to be looking at the cohorts necessary to have an endpoint of FEV1 is ridiculous. And I think we all agree that a meaningful endpoint in the patient space is not mortality. Fair enough, we're not gonna settle for that. So we need new biomarkers, and we need new endpoints, and we need those addressed with the FDA. So look at opportunities to run those through and get those identified. And then for us, while we have an incredible clinician, the CRCs that I mentioned, and these clinicians all over the states, a number of those are CTSA designation from NIH, but have we really developed a therapeutic development network? No. We have some key opinion leaders that I can count on both hands that when someone wants to do a trial, they go to them. We're not maximizing patient engagement. We're not maximizing recruitment efforts. And certainly we're not building that rapport and bringing up new KOLs. So a therapeutic development network where you can give people the tools to participate in research, that's where we're after. Biomarkers and TDNs. All new, just out of Medical and Scientific Advisory Committee, which includes, by the way, 4 patients, I believe. And so we're going to turn on the dime a little bit. We're going to let people know what we need, and we're probably going to ask for investigators to go in that direction, along with, still accepting incredible basic research and investigator-initiated stuff. Grant program suggestions, really make sure that you have the infrastructure to stay transparent, to get the results out there, to include patients in the decisions that are made, and to share that data if that's the way that you want it to go. And I think that most of us should. If we're developing something, it can't be held in silos. We've seen that for far too long. So share, and share across the aisles. If I learn something, and not me, if we learn something in Alpha-1, investigator does, John Walsh would say, hey, look, this is great for Alpha-1, we're gonna kick the tires, we're gonna move it forward, but I'll be darned if I'm not sharing this with everyone else in the space, right? That's the mentality that we have to come to. This stuff, Alpha-1 Health Foundation has spent a ton of money on stuff, all money well spent. But if we can help others avoid spending that money, we're in. And I look around here and I see familiar faces that at their core, they'll do the same. So Kristen Jensen from Lamb Foundation is smiling, and John and their CEO worked very closely together. And if you look at from our webpage out, very similar things. Don't reinvent the wheel, folks. Unique funding model. We have our venture philanthropy group, and it is a wholly owned subsidiary, for-profit subsidiary of the Alpha-1 Foundation. It's mission focused. The mission is slightly different. We state publicly, look, we're looking for novel therapies. This isn't about basic research, it's about translation. And so we look at the therapies and we look at the tools to get there, right? That's translational. If you can do great things, but you can't tell because you don't have an assay or an animal model or ways to really tell that you're being successful, that can be part of it. So we're in it to accelerate that therapeutic discovery. We tend to, we market ourselves, look, Alpha-1 Foundation is never going to come in and spend the millions and billions of dollars to take a product from the beginning to the end, but we sure as heck can stand up with a community behind us, with the data that we have behind us, with the infrastructure that we have, and hopefully reduce the cost of an entity to get a therapy to market and shorten the timeline, which is most important to us, right? So put your money where your mouth is, but more importantly, put your entire community and everything you've done since the day you stepped in and started your organization behind this discovery. We want to really leverage the experience of everything that we've done, the knowledge that comes out of running this patient advocacy group for 20 years. And that is all built on our basic research. A lot of the folks that are recipients of our Alpha-1 project investments on this for-profit subsidiary have been with us for 20 years. We'll go over some of those. Make sure that your investment agreements and terms are contractual, and then, of course, agree on those terms of success and what your fiscal arrangements are, right? So this is a little bit different where, okay, if you get commercialized or if you sell, once this product launches, find your terms, make sure that you understand kind of what your payback is. And we're never going to get rich on this, but it may help us, invest in the next guy that comes along. So we're really excited to be moving forward with the Alpha-1 project. And so when you look at is research working, and the Alpha-1 project being the venture philanthropy group, being built on all the knowledge and all of the basic research that we have, and in many times a lot of the same players. And we've made, there's a couple that aren't up here, we've made 11 investments foreign tools. We have a couple assays. We have animal models. We have 2 gene therapies. We have a vector organization. For the first time, we have a couple of organizations, and one just announced today that they're looking at the first ever liver therapies in gene silencing. So we have gene therapy, gene editing, gene silencing. We have second generation augmentation therapy, and we have antibodies and 28 pluripotent stem cell lines in animal models. And imagine now if you bring those assays, those animal models, and those pluripotent stem cells together, that's magic, and it's happening across the United States. And then, of course, we were really fortunate to invest and bring a fellow in and place them in NCATs. So figure out, again, where you have shared goals. And to us, we think the research is working. We don't have a cure, so none of us are sleeping tonight. We're going to plug forward. But we know where we want to get to, and I think that's absolutely what we have in common. So that's all I have.
That's it? Okay, we have some time for question and answer, so if you have a question, I'll get you a microphone. Oh, there you are, sorry.
Hi, I'm Libby Wolford with the Wiedemann-Steiner Syndrome Foundation, and we are at a kind of crux where we're ready to fund some projects, but also need to get our scientific advisory board better established. And I'm just wondering what the makeup of your scientific advisory boards are and what your expectations are of them.
So we've identified, we have a joint scientific advisory board where there are scientists and clinician researchers on it. So there's PhDs and MD PhDs. And we found people in the space who really understood the disease, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and they bring those perspectives. And we always have the patient perspective as a part of this review. We try to maximize the coverage of the specialties with the people that we choose. So we want somebody who understands stem cells. We want somebody who understands genetics. We want somebody who understands treatment and the treatment options that are out there in patient journey. So you try to figure out what your specializations are. What are the expertise? What are the proposals that you're going to get in for research, and do you have somebody who really knows the ins and outs of that and can scientifically review it? And then we have a ton of other advisors that we can call on to weigh in on things, people who are doing like artificial intelligence or extensive brain mapping or things like that. So we have and they're not necessarily part of our PAB. And then our expectations are that they serve a term, that they come to 1 year, every year in-person meeting, that they agree to do our grant review. We still have our scientific advisory board do our grant review. I've worked at agencies where the grant review is done externally and the scientific advisory board just advises. So that's also a model. And then they're on 2 teleconferences a year, and then they speak at our, when we host symposiums and things like that. So it's a pretty standard, scientific advisory board for us.
Yeah, and I would say ditto. I think the only difference is what your disease demands, right? We're multi-organ, so we have hepatologists as well as pulmonologists, and including on this, all the folks that Tracy just mentioned. So it's important. The patient perspective is key, because they'll tell you straight up, like, you're crazy. That doesn't matter to us. And we've seen patients swing decisions made in our medical and scientific advisory committee. We're to a point where we have a wholly separate grants advisory committee. I'd have to think about it. I don't know if we have any common members. I think that we do between MESAC and GAC. And we've started epidemiology working groups and stuff. So wherever we find the need, if it doesn't fit and we think it's something that needs to report up into MESAC, we've created those structures. I think importantly, we have a document of volunteer leadership. And whether it's MESAC or it's GAC or it's community engagement advisory committees or epidemiology working group or clinical resource center working group and council, those are all dictated. What are the charters? What are the terms? What do you need to do? And those are publicized. So it gives us a tool to really talk about people. And we stay true to that. We believe in transparency. And if we're ever veering or switching gears, that's the first thing that we report out before we do it. So very similar.
Yeah. And I just want to add to, that we have tiers of review. So we work with the patient and caregiver reviewers before because they're often very intimidated by the scientist and won't say anything. So we have sort of a pre-review with them. And then we have our scientific review where they're going in and they're looking like, is this feasible? Is this of merit? Is this something new in the field? Is it over ambitious? Like all of those criteria that only your professionals can weigh in on. And would you put your money on this? Is this good science or is this like, fringe stuff? And then we get out of that, and the patients are on that call, and they can weigh in. But we get actually separate scores from the patients, and then we get scores from the scientists, and then they get a chance to be together and revise their scores based on the discussion. And then we have yet a third level of review, which DoD does this too, but we call it programmatic review, and that's where we take everything that's been recommended to us, and it comes in-house to our board. And they make the final decision on the grant. So we want to fund the best science, but we also, if the best science is something we've already funded twice in another lab, it's too similar to that, or on the same gene we've already funded 6 times, then there might be programmatic reasons to not fund the highest scoring grant. And you want to be really transparent about that because your scientists will be like, hey, whoa, what? Why did you fund that? So we have this programmatic review that looks at the whole big picture of our funding portfolio and says, listen, we would love to fund that. It's amazing. Maybe we'll partially fund it, but we're getting too many things in this area. And then we try to go back and rewrite the RFA so we don't get that happening again.
Yeah, and I would say the audience or the participants that we add on the venture philanthropy side is that we have a scientific and business advisory council. So we add in the entrepreneurs and say, oh, look, science has been vetted. We think it's a great idea. We go through again, multiple tiers like you do. But from a business, is it viable? So we do add that component on the VC side.
Great. We had another question.
Hi. I remember John Walsh when he was just starting out at Genetic Alliance, and we were joining the Genetic Alliance Biobank when you were getting the biobank started, and our organization joined it also. But we had to drop out after about 4 years because we just didn't have the funding for it. We're a lot like LGS and doing all those same things. And I heard your talk last year on how you did the recurring revenue. How can we figure out a way to have that recurring revenue? Because all of our money comes from our families holding fundraisers, and we can only do so much. And we really have the need to move forward. And I keep thinking, what can we do? How do we figure out what we can do to have that recurring revenue that you do that helped you move so much further forward?
Well, so let me start again with how fortunate we were to have a dynamo like John Walsh. There was no other person like John Walsh, and if you came up with a solution, he'd find a problem to it. If you came up with a problem, he'd find a solution to it. So we tested and kicked everything from a 360 degree. It would be hard for me to prescribe what needs to happen in your community or your community or your community. What we did was we found gaps. So the NIH had discovered this augmentation therapy. Of course, it was purchased and licensed by another organization. It has to be infused on a weekly basis is generally the recommendation and the practice. There weren't enough infusion nurses. So we started AlphaNet as contracting out infusion nurses. We found that gap. We moved into patient self-management and the liaisons by bringing other patients into it because we knew that was a gap. We also knew that there was, compliance issues. We also early on started a pharmacy because we knew that we were finding patients faster than drug was available, and there was some hoarding and stuff. So we inserted ourselves into that to do the ethical thing and make sure that patients had what they needed on a fair basis, and that didn't go to the people that had more money than the other. So there was a lot of solutions put in place by inserting yourself into the problem. So find your gaps. I don't know what they are, but I think that, look around and how many of you get 17 calls a week or things asking for you to route your patients somewhere so someone can sell their data somewhere, right? Market research is massive. There's big money in what you have. We don't charge anything for it, but you're an asset. Make yourself the go-to and those opportunities to fill in those gaps will come. Just find yourself an entrepreneur, look at the space, look at where you need to go to, listen to industry interested in your space, in your disorder, and what they need or why they're not signing up, to look at your disorder and see if you can create some recurring source of revenue, some service that closes that gap and lets you be an active player.
I just want to add, so we are tiny. We just had our professional advisory board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are coming in, and with patient engagement as it is, they're really interested. Like, can you review our protocol? Can you do this? And we're like, we're these bunch of moms, and we're like, sure, of course, we'll do it for free. So it turns out that the medical doctors, they get paid extensive amounts of money to be key opinion leaders, and so they told us the figure, and we were like, are you kidding me? And so, we are collectively key opinion leaders, and you can provide, there's things that, we all have professionals in our community, and there are people who are comfortable reading a trial protocol. There are people who are comfortable weighing in on other aspects of it. Like, no, 9 blood draws in one day for every 2 weeks is not, no LGS kids are ever going to join that. And so one of the opportunities that we've seen emerging just now, and we're really having to, because we just are like, we'll do everything for free, and it's so great, and we will continue to do that. But there's this whole other field where people are getting paid as consultants to be these key opinion leaders, and we are those as the patients. And so why wouldn't our organization sign a contract with an organization and provide that same input that an MD does and that a PhD does, and we're weighing in on the patient point of view on whether or not this trial work or what unmet need is.
Would it have to be a wholly separate subsidiary then? Because then you run into the problem if you're getting all your money, a big amount of money, because we have biotech companies interested, and we've had these conversations, but if you get too much money from one, then you're considered under their thumb and stuff, the IRS looks at it, and so you have problems like that. And you don't want to stop the research, your families want to push it forward, so you want to be giving them, so do you have to start a separate entity to do that? And, there's so many
Right.
conflicts in everything there. It's really
I think that somewhere in your community, there's probably a lawyer that's going to give you better advice than I ever could. You have to look at these things. You have to look at the protection. Alpha One Foundation has policies on industry relations. We have an industry advisory council where we kind of pull all these interested parties that may fund us through charitable grants. We get them all together. We know what we can talk about, what we can't talk about, and what we can do. Whether or not something needs to be a separate entity, it really kind of is determined by the product. But I will tell you that patient engagement, if you're looking to find a cure, you're looking to change lives, patient engagement, this is a study that came out in the oncology space, and it was published by Citi. Patient engagement, just imagine how much it costs to change one thing in a protocol. Millions. Patient engagement in phase 2 saved an average of 2.5 years. Right? Patient engagement on phase 3 saved 1.5 years. That is highly marketable. Whether or not you take a dollar amount, or it moves your mission forward, or you become attractive because you can de-risk that process, put it on your shirt, get the tattoo on your forehead, and walk into anyone that's going to listen and say, you need me. I sat on an ad board where they were talking about this crazy duration and crazy amount of steroid to take prophylactically, and I went, there's no one I know that's going to sign up for that. Is that based? What can you do? Where can you reduce that? That would have been a protocol change that, with amendments, would have cost them. I don't even know if they'd play in the space. But no one would have signed up, and no one certainly would have stayed in it. You are a key component in protocols. We know what a consent needs to look at from a patient standpoint. We know what protocols need to look at. We can de-risk these from a money standpoint, from a time standpoint. They're equal. Insert yourselves, and if it moves your mission, don't worry about the dollar amount because you're moving your mission, and I think the money follows it. But from a money standpoint, cover yourself legally and find a gap that you can fill. There's hotlines all over. Can you answer a phone? Can you get HIPAA certified? Can you be an adverse event? All sorts of stuff.
I have a question. Lisa Sobey from Hope for Hypothalamic Hamartomas. we are same size as LGS, 4 or 5 moms running the organization, and we wish we had the problems of how do you sort the grants and which ones do you fund. We are struggling to get the attention of the young investigators and the geneticists. How do you do that if you're a small organization, you have some money you're willing to give and support, but just need to get the attention of the science?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I have a whole resource list that I can give you. I advertise in this group's newsletter and that group's newsletter. Anytime something is published on LGS, I get the first author's contact information, and I say, hey, did you know about the LGS Foundation? Because they have young people. We often fund postdocs at that level because that's where our funding a dollar amount sort of lies. We actually do get senior investigators that will apply because money is tight, and we have funded some of them, but we mostly fund postdocs, and they all have postdocs. If I see something come out in the press on that disease and I don't know who that research is, I'll let them know. We advertise heavily at American Epilepsy Society meeting, a Child Neurology Society meeting, and we just sort of tack on as much as we can to those groups. But I think the most, and those are all good. American Epilepsy Society also has like a global message board that you can just post on. That was really lucrative for us. But the other thing was really reaching out to scientists who you see doing something because you got an article alert or you got a press release can be really meaningful too. And so it's just, and then once you have your list of 25 places where you send your RFA to with a little blurb about you're trying to fund it, the grants are coming in. We just we went from advertising in 3 sources to advertising in 15 sources and got 3 times more grants this last round than we had applications than we had in the past. So it's just knowing where to put it, where the people are looking.
I mean, ditto again, but I would also say use the networks that you have. Use your clinicians, use the KOLs that you already have. They've built careers, they're family members, they're part of the community. That inclusion is attractive. And I think also if a young investigator approaches you and there's not a grant or they submit an application, it's not a go, don't let them go. Mentor them, find here's why it didn't work, maybe, bring them in and have them be part of something. But yeah, use the networks that you have. And I'll say that, the Alpha One Foundation, we continue to look at goals of young investigators and folks coming back, and just now we received more applications than we ever have. So is it a perfect science? Did we have it nailed 10 years ago? Clearly not, right? We are all open from social media and all the platforms for communication, all the interconnectedness, the possibilities are numerous and probably infinite, and tomorrow they'll all be different, right? So stay innovative.
We have time for one more and back here.
Thank you. I'm Alan Thomas. I run a Ataxia patient group from Wales in the UK. My question or comment is a bit double-edged sword, perhaps. Have you ever come across a pharmaceutical company or industry that might have an incentive not to invest in a treatment or a cure because they're making more money, but with a daily medicine for that condition?
Yeah. I would say no, because we police our space as do our patients. And we are the go-to organization. But you hear it. You hear it all the time. Are people in it for the money or long-term things? Are people really looking for cures? I know that people have those concerns out there. We're pretty pleased with the, I'll call them industry partners because they are that. They come through when it's time for charitable grants, and they make investments in research that will ultimately, hopefully, put them out of business. So again, that comes back to our founders and then John Walsh not putting up with, pardon my French here, any crap. If you're not involved in the mission, go get involved in some other mission, because there will be no money coming to you. And I think you have to be really forceful in if you make yourself the go-to, then set the rules. I do know that's a problem. I luckily can't address it any more than saying that we're fortunate not to have that. But it came with real diligence, and it came with real hard, fast lines in the sands. And so, can you speak to that a little bit more?
I can say something similar along those lines. So there's a lot of transparency, like once you're interacting with these organizations, whether it's pharmaceutical companies or biotech or the FDA or any other nonprofits. And so really getting in and, and them looking you in the eye and seeing you, and it's like, well, what is your process? How did you make that decision? Why did you make that decision? There's one area that I am concerned about that's not transparent in our community at all, and that's the payer system. They don't talk to us unless we're on the phone yelling at them because they didn't cover our kid's helmet because it wasn't medically necessary. But they're going to pay for the ER visit when we have a head injury, right? So, so I think that when you get in and you sit down, these are good people that got into this space, by and large, to help move things forward and advance. You find those people, you work with them, and you try to find out what their incentives are. Sometimes the incentives are just misaligned. Like in science, the most important thing, like I said, for us was grants and papers. And so they're driven by getting to those incentives. And so they might behave in certain ways because that's what's important to them. And so if you say, well, as a patient group, actually we don't really, that's not the most important thing to us, but how do we align with what's important to you for the time being on what's important for us, which is the research and moving that forward and then moving on to the next. But just get in and build these relationships with them and ask them and say, hey, what motivated you to do that? I'm sure it happens, but we never know about it. There are people who are in it, for money and aren't aligned on healthcare. But by and large, the people I meet are the people that really want to help others have a better life, and not. None of us are getting rich here.
No, I'd say if they're in it for the wrong reason, they hear your story. The patient stories and patient engagement are changing minds everywhere. Again, that's what you really bring to this market. Never stay quiet, never stay complacent, and always stay. Look, challenges breed innovation. If we didn't have them, we'd be doing things the same way today that we did 10 years ago. You can make or break someone's future in your space with patient voice these days, and that's a powerful thing. So figure out how to harness it.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy and Karen, for the discussion and insight and for the great questions today. At this time, we'd like to invite you to open your mobile app and take a brief survey and provide feedback on our session. After, we'd like everyone to join us for the networking lunch sponsored by IONUS, and then come back for our final breakout summit of the summit at 2 p.m. Thanks again, and let's give our speakers a round of applause.